Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And we continue on our high performance HR series, and we're into our penultimate episode this week. So last week we were talking about talent in terms of inviting talent, exciting talent, attracting talent to the organisation. And now we're going to talk about how we retain talent and develop it, because after all, what's the point of investing in all of that recruitment if we're not going to do something which is going to help them to deliver within the organisation and of course stay? The main thing really we want to start thinking about here are the foundations of building and sustaining a high performance culture in this environment. We know that attracting great people is tough, but keeping them, that's a real challenge. So how can we keep them motivated, engaged and growing? And we've talked about tools like performance management, we've talked about leadership, and next week we're going to talk about culture. All of these are parts of the jigsaw puzzle. But for now, let's focus in on what we really mean by talent. Let's bust a myth to start with. When we say the word talent, what comes to mind for you? Now, those of us who've been in businesses quite a long time may remember when it was very much a niche group of people. It was those high flyers that were perceived as having leadership potential. But in today's world, that definition is way too narrow. We know that talent is broad. It's about seeking out everybody's talent. Talent is your high-performing specialist. It could be your steady, reliable expert. It could be the emerging leader, the creative thinker, the person who quietly mentors others behind the scenes. Everyone plays their part, and actually organisations today need to find ways to harness everybody's talent. And we need to broaden our definition. Talent's going to be diverse in terms of background, role, aspiration and style. It's not about putting people in boxes, and we will explore the 9-box grid shortly and see whether that's still relevant. But it's really about us learning what people can become in the right environment. Now, when this goes out, this particular episode, we're looking at it's going to be out in September, October 2025. But I did a podcast, I'm recording this podcast in July, and I did a webinar last week on this topic. We'll put it in the show notes. But we absolutely explored this, where we looked about the language around talent and the unintended exclusivity that can come with it. So if we want to build inclusive, and inclusivity is so important in terms of engagement and belonging and retention, then we need to have something which is inclusive culturally and also supports high performance. And that means we need to make sure that our definitions of talent are equally inclusive. Retention and development, it does frustrate me that often organisations overlook this. The reality is loads of money is invested in recruitment. It's a really costly, in terms of time and finance, activity, but all too often the way people are onboarded is poor. And I haven't really touched on that massively in this series, but I have done lots of content on this. I do a webinar called the 5 aspects of onboarding, which is pointing out about how much really we should think about when we're onboarding people, which is over and above just like giving people the kit on day one. So there seems to be much more of it. People's expectations have changed. They want more than a paycheck. They want purpose. They want flexibility. They want growth, and they want to feel that their career is moving forward and they have a future. And this is something that is increasing. I mean, LinkedIn did a survey in 2024. They do their global talent trends survey, and they found that 93% of organisations are concerned about retention, and what stops people from staying is when they feel that they haven't got career opportunities. They need learning and development opportunities, and that doesn't mean endless e-learning. It means genuine opportunities for them to feel that they're growing. And a 2023 CIPD report said that only 48% of UK employees felt that their organisations offer good career development. That is a huge mismatch and a massive missed opportunity, especially because organisations are not standing still. The world is changing so rapidly, so everybody should be able to grow. It's maybe around having a more traditional way in which people think that the only way in which they're developing is by going up the hierarchy, and with flatter structures that's just not as easy to do. So we have to be more creative about this. We want to keep these high performers, we have to invest in them, not just once a year through a performance management allocation of rating and some pay review. It needs to be conscious, it needs to be intentional, it needs to be on their terms as well. So if you were to think of a modern talent strategy, because this sort of topic has been around for the last 20, 30 years, what makes it different now in 2025 when we're looking at a talent strategy? Because, there's still things that have been around for a long time where we want to be maybe looking at talent pools from a point of view of giving people skills that are relevant to wherever they are and wherever their trajectory is. And you might look at talent in terms of particular pockets of key skill that you need to retain or develop in your organisation, and that's a business critical talent. But there are other aspects. Those things will always be with us, right? But there's other things to consider that I think if we're thinking about a more modern approach to talent strategy, the 4 things that I'd say we need to think about that might have subtly changed things is, 1 is your hybrid approach to work and visibility. I'll come back to each of these. The second one is really about having skilled based workforce. It's about agility. Third one is not just doing talent management, it's about career co-creation, so working with people. And the fourth one is about including diversity, equity, inclusion, which is something that's kind of sat as a bolt-on, but really should be immersed. It should be a real foundation point. So if you're thinking about your talent management strategy, you're out there thinking about things, you will of course be thinking about all the stuff that I've talked about for years in webinars, where you want to identify what the business need is and identify where your gaps are, come up with a hypothesis, a way of developing it or fixing it, if you like, for want of a better word, and then evaluate. So that's your standard process. And you may look at it in terms of a specific skill, but you need to also have these other elements which are just making it slightly more complex when we look at talent strategy nowadays. So, hybrid working, now thankfully now we're 5 years post-pandemic, but there's definitely, it has changed the world of work for good. And that does mean that you are much less likely to see people face to face in an office 5 days a week in many industries. And in actual fact, much of talent does not want to be in the workplace 5 days a week. They want to come in 2 or 3 days maximum. And that's all well and good if people are able to perform, and the balance of their work-life balance that offers them means that you retain them. That's a good thing. But it can mean that people are less visible. And it may mean that you have a bias, let's say, towards, if you work really closely with somebody and you're a line manager, you might be more biased towards those people just because you see them, not because they're better. So we do need to think, when you're considering talent, where do you have visibility gaps? Have you got inclusive processes that don't just rely on the person who shouts the loudest or is physically present? So you're going to need tools, data-driven insights, structured development conversations are carried out consistently, and transparent feedback loops. Now that also links into your career co-creation, which is my third point, but I'll come on to that one in a moment really. The other thing is about, it doesn't work so much now. Everyone needs to be flexible. Workforce planning, it isn't as simple as saying this is the job. Jobs have really got blurry edges now, and you need people to be really quite flexible. Businesses need agility. That does mean it's quite interesting for people who like a bit of variety. It can mean it's a bit destabilising for those who don't love variety. But we really need to understand people's skills, and there's this term called skill adjacencies. So you can now get these really clever tools, AI-driven tools that help you to map skill adjacencies, where you might identify that somebody who's just been a particularly great person in a specific role, maybe they were a great person, a great communicator in a sales role or something like that, then they may well go well into something like training or marketing, because they've got all those communication skills that they can equally use. Someone in a more analytical role may therefore also be really useful going into a market research role or a scientific role. So thinking about where we've got these skills adjacencies that may be outside of a directorate silo, and this tends to be in a bigger company, I suppose, but it can be just as applicable in a small company. If you think about, is someone good at problem solving? Well, could they go and problem solve in an entirely different area? So having people being more open to using their skills in a more varied way. I mean, it's interesting, actually, I'm just thinking out loud about my example there, having worked in large organisation and small organisations. In large organisations, people can get a bit stuck in silos. So we have to be more overtly aware about how could people maybe get a secondment outside of that silo. In smaller organisations, you have to have wider skill set to keep the organisation running. So in some ways, that's where people can, that's almost, you might find one person is doing the skills of 3 or 4 in a larger organisation. So they have those skill adjacencies, but we may need to think about where they need to develop them. But it's really useful for us to think about how people can use their skills. And it's almost, rather than you forcing a person to fit the needs of the role, it's working out what skills does that person need to meet the needs of the business, and which skills do they need to harness or develop that will make them more effective in that role. And equally, how can they use those skills? How can we almost retain people and build roles around them to a certain extent, as long as it's in the best interest of both the individual and the organisation. So being creative about workforce planning, and this links into this whole concept of career co-creation. How can we engage the individual in driving their career? People don't want, one size fits all plastic careers. Well, most people don't. They want choice. They want autonomy, and they want clarity on how they can grow. Or certainly the people that you want to retain in your organisation want choice, autonomy and clarity on how they can grow, and they want to be proactive and supported. So this is where we need to, again, co-create careers. And of course, this doesn't happen overnight, and HR can't do it on their own. So this is where we need to get our line managers having regular performance conversations that includes a career conversation that develops people, not just for the needs of the job they're in now, but maybe for the needs of the job in the future. And we need to hold people accountable for carrying out their learning and development in line with these opportunities. Career progression should be something that people can naturally navigate. They're not having to guess or just be lucky if they're around in the right place at the right time. So real kind of co-creation, I like this idea that you're proactively developing it in conjunction with the individual. That's really empowering. But as I say, it means you haven't got a command and control culture. You've got to have an empowering culture where leaders are prepared to talk and develop and coach. And you have to create that opportunity for people to step into roles where they're maybe not fully formed. They're going to develop that role, and they're going to develop those skills once they're in them. And then the fourth point to weave through all of this is making sure that diversity, equity, inclusion is woven throughout your talent process. Are you using the data that you get out of your systems just to find out, is there inherent bias in ratings, in nominations? Do certain people disproportionately get the opportunities for promotion? Do certain groups feel more excluded from opportunities or don't get to give feedback, or whatever that might be? So making sure really objectively, so that means using data, that you're not missing out on diverse talent just because of old biases. And that's a really key one, just to make sure if you want to consciously weave through it. So I mentioned earlier that I would talk about those traditional, are they sacred cows? I'm not sure. Practical tools that we can use to support retention and development. Now, I'll touch on here 9-box grids and career pathways. Now, the 9-box grid, it has its pros and cons. It has its lovers and haters. But, there's many ways in which you can use it, and it can be a useful tool in the right organisation and used well. In an organisation, we're talking here about using it from a talent management point of view. So this might be where you've got a 9-box grid which is plotting performance versus potential. Now, there are loads of caveats around using it. You can only really use it if you have a well-established approach to evaluating performance. So if you don't have a decent performance management process, you probably need to have ratings of some description. You probably need to have some form of calibration. It's quite hard to objectively manage performance. It's impossible to objectively manage performance, I would argue, if you don't have well set smart objectives that people are working towards. But let's say you do. Then the other axis, generally the y-axis, would be potential. And potential is usually defined as someone who has potential to go up the organisation in the next, let's say, 18 months to 3 years, that they're able to go 1 or 2 steps up in terms of seniority. Now, already as I'm saying this, I'm thinking this is quite a hierarchical way of looking at things and quite old-fashioned in that respect. You need to have a hierarchical organisation to be able to go up. But if you just think about it as a concept, it's a way of separating out the people in your organisation and helping to see how you can develop them relevant to where they are right there. Because one size doesn't fit all, and that's where I think this can be relevant. As an aside, one organisation I'm aware of, lots of people do use different criteria to potential, because there is an argument against potential being something. How do we know who someone else's potential is? It is quite a subjective description. One company I know uses ability to learn, in terms of willingness to learn. Now, again, you could argue that's a bit subjective, but the individual could demonstrate that by showing that they'd taken up a lot of the learning, that they were essentially standing up and being counted, whereas potential is something that quite often is decided by people in a darkened room. So it is really capable of bringing bias with it. But a 9-box grid, if it works well, it helps highlight development needs, identify successes, and inform promotion decisions. So you can use it to support focused development planning, identifying those people who need it. It can also help you see talent that you might consider to be flight risk. Those top performers, you can see perhaps they're not getting the next role and not being developed or slightly disengaged. You might lose them. So how do you think about there? And you can use it to create differentiated development plans, which are brilliant for helping that person feel valued and hopefully keeping them in the organisation. And by the way, when I say a differentiated development plan, that doesn't mean that you've got to identify people and send 20 of your highest potential and performance people off to Henley Business School or Cranfield, wherever your choice one is. That's a really expensive way of doing things, and you're basically sending them off to go and do an MBA, and yeah, that's going to be good for them, but it's not a differentiated development plan, and it's not necessarily going to give you the biggest bang for your buck in an organisation. So I would be more inclined to think about how you can identify these pools of people and work out where their potential skills gaps and their interests are, and make it customised as opposed to sending someone off for an expensive sheep dip. The disadvantage of 9-box grids is it can feel reductive. People don't like being labelled. You've absolutely got a risk of bias if not carefully calibrated, because people don't fit in boxes easily. And to make it useful, you need meaningful follow-up actions. So I think it's something that you can use it as a starting point for a conversation. It's a useful structure. It's a useful way of, just thinking about how people differentiate, but it's not a final verdict. Now, 9-box grid is absolutely overkill for lots of organisations, and you can still look at things which what you might talk about as career pathways, or you also hear about creating career lattices, and that's more of a managed either pathway up a specific, let's say, managerial, technical or project-based sort of route up an organisation, or we were talking about where you've got adjacent skills. So career lattice might be the way you're moving across something. And I think the thing there to think about is when you're designing a career framework, well, how specific are you going to do? You can do it in quite an ad hoc way, or it might be that you've got a very specific skill set in your organisation that you need to retain that. Let's say project management are absolutely essential to your organisation. So what you might want to do is create a career pathway with sort of artificial seniority within it. And you could do this where you've got someone who comes in as an associate and or assistant or something, then they become a specialist, then they become a senior specialist, and then they become a consultant specialist, whatever it might be. But you can create your own hierarchy, which is slightly artificial and internal. You don't have to pay people huge amounts to go up the levels, because you can actually create the status through things like labelling, through an improved T's and C's, a better title. People let a title matters. So those sort of things you can think about, which would help them develop. Things to consider again with a career framework: have you got time? How many can you do? Are there multiple routes for people to grow? Do you know who fits into the career pathway? How do you qualify them to sort of be part of it? Or does it fit for everybody? Can people self-select for the development to go up this career pathway and potentially get to the senior role or consultant role? Is it clear and transparent how people use this career pathway? Because the point of a career pathway does need to be, if you're going to do it formally, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be visible, people need to understand it. So have you got the bandwidth or capability to define it and make it work in that skill set? That's some of the things. So that takes time, and if you're going to support it with aligned learning, that also takes time. So lots of systems can help here, whether you're mapping dynamic role profiles and skill adjacencies, or using your learning management platform to help people to self-select into development, or you're using something like a structured development centre or monitoring. There's lots of things that can help do this sort of thing. And use your technology, use your learning platforms, look at people's career aspirations. If you use Actus, we have a career aspirations section, we have a talent management section. One of the talent management sections is where you can build your own talent profile, so people can actually show where they've got key skills, and you can search for those within the organisation. You can then also pull those together to help people, if they were going into a career pathway, think about how they're going to map their route and what development they need to support them on that journey. So technology is coming on massively in this sort of area, so it's a really great way to tap into it. So summarising, I think, so in terms of this, what are the takeaways from this session on talent? First of all, let's broaden our definition of talent. Let's make sure we are not thinking of talent as that old-fashioned little cliquey group of people. We need to include people who are specialists, future leaders, people with deep knowledge, those ones that you don't want them to leave without getting that information out. So they could be right, close to retirement, for example. It's not just your usual suspects. What information do you need, and what is talent in your organisation? When you're trying to get the information out of them, engage with your people. So make sure you know what they want in terms of retention and development, because the whole point of this is, if we think everyone's talent, then we want to retain the best performers, we want to help people to perform. So you need to listen to them, use surveys, check-ins, career conversations, understand what people value and where they want to go. You need to check that your line managers have the right skills, that they're doing the right things, that it's all very well, you can be doing all this in the background, but if your line manager is basically not communicating, not motivating, not investing time with their people, and not having career conversations that are meaningful, you're kind of banging your head against a brick wall. So you need to make sure that your line managers and the culture of management is aligned with everything you're trying to do. Then make sure you're covering things like inclusion. So audit your development processes, your talent processes for bias. Make sure you've got diversity in your talent pools and have equitable access to learning. And then in terms of things like your career pathways or 9-box grids, choose the things that are right, or the best things for you. Modify it if it works. Turn it into 4-box grid for your organisation. Whatever works, make it applicable to you. But if you've got a career pathway, make it visible and achievable for people. Then it's motivational, right? Not everyone wants to progress, but the fact they can see that there's opportunity is often enough for people to feel motivated. So you want to make sure that people are bought into it and they have that opportunity to co-create where they want to go. And then finally, if you are going to do something like this, there's no point at all in doing your 9-box grid or your succession plan or a development centre if you don't do anything with it. So don't start investing and don't bite off more than you can chew. Start small and then turn those insights into action. See whether it works and then follow through again. So it's really making sure that you end up with manageable ways to doing this. So that's it for this week's HR Uprising episode. A bit more of a deep dive on talent retention and development. Hopefully some food for thought and practical steps for your organisation. I'll put links in the show notes, which is we've got links on the webinar that I did on talent management, and there's also a download you can get, which is a succession planning jargon buster. But do check out things like our on-demand learning platform, so Actus, Perform, Learn, all of our tools. Take a look at those. And just one separate, if I have anybody here who's listening in who is in the financial services industry, keep an eye out for our brand new product, Actus Oversight. So that's being launched out there, which gives you dashboards. I mean, you could use it for talent, but right now we're focusing it on specifically financial services. But do keep an eye out. And finally, hope you listen in a couple of weeks' time when it's our last episode in this 10-part high performance series. I really hope that you found it valuable. If you have had value from what you've heard, would you do us a massive favour and give us a recommendation, a review? We've just moved onto a brand new platform. So all of our reviews from the previous platform have kind of expired, if you like. So it would be really, really appreciated if you get value out of what we do here, if you could take a moment to give us a rating or a review, hopefully positive. Thank you so much for listening. Speak to you soon.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.
This episode was brought to you by Disruptive Media, helping bold entrepreneurs stand out through podcasting, video, and social content. Visit disruptivemedia.co.uk to learn more.